Lori, I was going to ask you, Caleb kind of talked about his a little bit, but is there anything else you'd like to share about your political upbringing? That's always important to know.
I'm an anomaly.
How did you get where you are?
Yeah, I didn't fit in my own family. I was born into a very conservative home, here in the middle of America, here in the heartland, very conservative state. And I was raised in Oklahoma, also spent 25 years in Austin, Texas. My folks were both Goldwater conservatives. They were Nixon Republicans and later Reagan Republicans. And even as a child, I was pretty liberal. I mean, my first political memories are of Watergate, and that made a huge impact on me. From an early age, I realized that all presidents are liars and crooks, with very few exceptions. I learned, I grew up in the era of the Vietnam War coming to an end, of the Church Committee, the Rockefeller Committee, all these, in the late 70s, there were all these various congressional committees investigating the intelligence agencies, investigating the JFK assassination, the assassination of Martin Luther King. So what I got from that as a kid was don't trust the government, which probably laid the groundwork for becoming a libertarian later. But I saw Jimmy Carter come on the scene in 1976. And as a little kid, I campaigned for Jimmy Carter. I was like, 7 years old, and I'm out knocking on doors. Hey, can I put a Carter sign in your yard? And even people who were pretty conservative let me do it because I was such a cute little kid. They're like, okay, yeah, you can put the sign in the yard. You can put the bumper sticker on the car. So I campaigned for Carter. And as a kid, I thought Jimmy Carter was, coolest thing since sliced bread. And he let me down. I supported Ted Kennedy when he challenged Jimmy Carter. I'm a Kennedy file, as you probably know, student of the JFK assassination, love the Kennedy family. And I wanted Ted Kennedy to beat Carter for the nomination, but that didn't happen. And we ended up with Ronald Reagan. So I grew up in the Reagan era. That's when I was in high school, and George Bush came along after 8 years of Reagan and 4 years of Bush. I was so ready for a change in 1992 that I went out and did the dumb thing. I voted for Bill Clinton.
Slick Willie.
And I
Snake
knew
Willie.
better, guys. I knew he was a crook. I knew he was a snake.
But he was
My
so
first
charming.
job, Caleb will like this. My first job as a reporter, I was working for KEBC Radio, and I was the state capitol reporter. This is when I was in college. And I met Bill Clinton several times when he was governor of Arkansas. And he was always coming to the state capitol to do business with Governor Henry Bellman of Oklahoma. And I met him several times in the halls of the Capitol, and he was always hitting on me. And I was
Imagine that.
17. I was 17. That was before I knew, of course, of his penchant for young women. But yeah, he was hitting on all the attractive female reporters. It wasn't just me. So anyway, I knew this guy was a slime, right? But I voted for him like an idiot in 1992. And then Waco happened. And I never trusted Bill Clinton again.
That was a game changer for you.
I lived in Austin when that happened. And, you know, Waco's just about an hour and a half drive from Austin. They're practically neighbors up the road. I was actually driving past the Branch Davidian church on I-35 the day that they set it ablaze, that the government burned it down on April 19th, 1993. I could see the plumes of smoke, black smoke in the air. You could see it for miles as they were burning those people alive.
The Democrats.
The Democrats. The guy I voted for. It made me so angry. And, you know, they killed, I think it was 68 people.
They killed kids.
And little kids.
Burn alive.
Kids. And they could have arrested David Koresh at any time when he was out for his morning jog or when he went into the town of Waco. If he was who they wanted, and supposedly he was, why didn't they just grab him? Why did they have to make this big show and murder these people in a church?
Right.
And they tried to tell us it's a compound. It's not a church, it's a compound. They tried to make him sound like it was Jonestown, right? Like it was a cult. And I actually got to know some of the surviving.
That's my libertarian friend John there, Lori.
Hey,
that's
John.
what he said. I put his comment up there.
And he was 9 and he figured it out, right? At the time. And yet the media was lying to us through the whole standoff, the 51 days. The media was totally lying about it and demonizing the Branch Davidians, trying to make it sound like David Koresh was Satan himself. And I'm not defending David. Obviously, he had a problem with young girls. So I actually did get to know some of the Branch Davidian survivors. There was a lady named Catherine Madison, Clive Doyle, some of the others. And there were only a handful who survived. They're the ones who managed to get out of the building by jumping out of windows, or in some cases, some of them surrendered. And they promptly all went to prison. Prison for, I think they got 7 or 8 year sentences. And it was just on illegal firearms charges because the government really didn't have anything else.
Right.
So they got them on that. But they locked them up for several years. And then after they got out in the early 2000s, I had the chance to meet and interview several of them. And I came to understand Waco like I never did before. And you know, I realized now that they were, you know, kind of a kooky Christian sect, you know, offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventists. They had some beliefs that I don't agree with, but they didn't deserve to die.
No, they didn't. Just
You
because
know?
Koresh had a problem with young girls. I mean, Billy Clinton had a problem with young girls, but they didn't fire, you know, Sherman fire tanks into the Arkansas state house there. So was that was that when you kind of went over to the libertarian side? Is that when the libertarian torch started burning for you?
Well, I was politically lost for a few years. I was becoming increasingly pissed off at the Democratic Party. You know, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumers, the Maxine Waterses, they all came in that great sweep of 1992, right? The Clinton years. They're the ones who, in my opinion, ruined the Democratic Party. And as the years went on, it was scandal after scandal and so much corruption. And so then in 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And
Another one.
That's too close to home. I was living in Austin at the time, but that's my hometown.
Yeah, a lot of fishy stuff with that one too.
And that federal building was named after Alfred P. Murrah, famous judge in Oklahoma. He and my dad were close personal friends.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's a friend of the family because my dad was a lawyer and he knew Judge Murrah. Everybody called him Fish. That was his nickname. Anyway, when the federal building was bombed, I just happened to be in town visiting my mother. And the blast, we lived about 5 miles from downtown. The blast literally shook me out of bed.
Wow.
It was so strong, rattled the windows. The whole house was shaking. My mom and I are like, what the hell was that? And we ran and turned on the TV set to see what it was. Was that a sonic boom? Was that there was no thunderstorms around? What the fuck was that? And it took 15 minutes to finally get an aerial shot from a helicopter flying over the Murrah building. We saw this huge crater in the ground in front, and the whole front of the building gone, and people just hanging off the sides waiting for a rescue. It was horrible. And it's right across the street from the newspaper where I started as a reporter at the Daily Oklahoman.
Wow.
So it was very personal for me. It hurt my heart. And I knew people who worked in that building and lost their lives that day. I know people who were injured that day, and they still carry those injuries, both mental and physical. So that was it. That was, I was done with the Democratic Party.
Well,
done with the Clintons.
I think we can bring that back around for something to Caleb to comment on, because I feel like at that time, Caleb, you know, if you put even the tiniest bit of tinfoil on your head, who were they focusing on at that time? It was whites inside the country, right? Isn't that who they wanted to go after? And now it kind of feels like they're moving back there. But real quick, before you sound off on that, Caleb, I just wanted to say, Lori, that I just realized from talking to you that Waco was also really influential on me getting where I'm at.
Really?
I remember listening to Bill Hicks at the age of 18.
Oh, yeah, I knew Bill.
You knew Bill?
I knew Bill.
We
in Austin. He was always around Austin in the 80s and 90s.
But his bit about Waco, he said, he said I've seen with my, he said, I was there. They fired fire into those buildings.
Yeah.
And I was at College of the Ozarks, a Christian school, very right-wing Republican school. You probably know from Oklahoma.
Yep.
Like the last 5 people they've had there were like Colin Powell, George Bush, Sarah Palin. These are the convocation speaker. Newt Gingrich. I've got a picture of me and Newt Gingrich.
Really?
I need to make that my profile picture, Caleb. Me and Newt shaking hands. I asked him if he turned against Clinton because Clinton was cheating on his wife, and that was bringing down the moral fortitude of America, because I knew he had done the same thing.
Was that before or after he got
goes,
caught?
No. He goes, it's MTV and hip hop music. That's what he said. So that was pretty funny. But I watched a documentary on Waco. Caleb's mom's the librarian, so he knows. Even the librarians at the most conservative Christian school in the country they got a stash, and they had a documentary on Waco down there. And I took it back to my room and watched it, and I was just like, I mean, it rocked my world. And then
documentary, do you remember the name?
I can't remember the name of it, but it was really good.
When they made Rules of Engagement.
It could have been.
Yeah.
But the other story about your professor at Oklahoma, I had one of my favorite professors at C of O. We had a literary panel, and I asked them what form of literary criticism they gravitated towards. And one of my favorite professors, sweetest guy, kindest heart, he said, I gravitate towards Marxist criticism, feminist criticism, and multicultural criticism. He got a letter from Jerry C. Davis, the president, that said, if you ever mention Marx's name on this campus again, this is in 2010. He goes,
Wow.
you'll immediately be fired. And he said, all right, see you
Wow.
later. And he teaches at Oklahoma State now.
Does
So,
he really?
yeah, so he went the other way
Sweet.
of your story there. But what do you think
Sweet.
about that, Caleb, about the Biden administration kind of moving back to the militia right, if you will, or they call it such?
I've had a series of thoughts while I was listening to Lori talk there, and in response to what you're asking, because a number of things come to mind. One of the first things that comes to mind is, you talk about the bias in education. I think that one of the biggest differences in red state versus blue states is the way they teach about, the 20th century, communism versus fascism. Because I grew up in a small town, rural area. Ohio is not technically a red state, but the area I was in was very, very conservative. And the way we talked about communism was communism. You had to be an idiot to believe in communism, because communists want everyone to get paid the exact same wage, no matter how hard they work. And they don't believe in God, so they're satanic. And, you have to be an idiot to be a communist. But fascism and Nazi, well, Hitler made the trains run on time, and we were so mean to Germany after World War II. And yeah, obviously Hitler killed millions of people. The Holocaust is bad, but it's kind of an understandable mistake. And I've noticed that in
Makes my head hurt.
In blue states, though, they teach the opposite, right? In New York City, this is a very, very Jewish city. You ain't teaching that, you know what I mean? They teach the opposite. And because, the Communist Party was such a big deal here, I mean, most people in New York City have, if you've been here for several generations, you've got a grandfather or somebody who was around the CPUSA, like the city council seats during World War II in Harlem, both of them were Communist Party seats. So you can't teach that, right? So they teach, well, it's the opposite. It's that communism is, well, obviously it doesn't work and it's evil or whatever, but it's an understandable mistake. They had good ideals. They were against racism, but fascism is, that's pure evil, hate, bigotry, and that's kind of the difference in kind of red state, blue state. And it's interesting because it's like you meet people from red states, they can't understand how anyone would possibly be a communist. You meet people from blue states, they can't understand why anyone could possibly like Donald Trump, because he sounds like a fascist. So therefore, and that this is just this interpretation of history. This is kind of a difference, and I've noticed that. And then that points me towards something deeper, which is that if you go back further, I mean, we're talking, you go way back, in Oklahoma, there was an event in 1917 called the Green Corn Rebellion. Yeah.
I love that you know about that.
Well, the only reason I know about it is because I was in the Workers' World Party for 8 years. And the founder of the Workers' World Party, Sam Marcy, he had a pamphlet called The Bolsheviks in War. And it ends with the Green Corn Rebellion and documenting, and he called that the ideal anti-war movement. He's talking about what kind of anti-war movement do we need. He's criticizing the pacifists of the 1980s that were marching against nuclear weapons. And he said the Green Corn Rebellion, that's what we need. He ends by hailing the Green Corn Rebellion. And that was in Oklahoma. And it was multiracial. I would love to read
that paper if you could send it to me.
Sure. And it was multiracial. I mean, it was low-income white people. It was Native Americans. It was black people. And they united into one group. And when the government said, we're going to draft you all and send you to fight in World War I, they got their shotguns and their rifles. And they said, no, we're not. And they took up arms against the people. Yeah, they took up arms against the American government. I mean, they turned their guns around. They made an imperialist war into a civil war, which is what, the Bolsheviks and Lenin had said you're supposed to do, ideally. So, you read that. Obviously, I don't advocate anything illegal, but that was a big thing. And it's like, if you look at it, Kansas also used to be a stronghold of socialist thinking. Earl Browder, the founder or the big leader of the Communist Party in the 1930s, his nickname was the Man from Kansas. That's what they called him. He was the Man from Kansas. His campaign election theme song was the Man from Kansas. They played up that he was from Kansas. They even had a parade, where they had William Z. Foster, who was an Irish American from Philadelphia. They had him holding a big hammer. And then they had Earl Browder, because he was from Kansas, a farming state, holding a big sickle. And the two of them were like the symbol of the American working class. Earl Browder and William Z. Foster, the hammer and the sickle. And you look at that, and the more we get into this, things are much more complicated. I remember as I was really reading a lot of communist literature, I read about the Teamsters strike in Minneapolis, 1934, where the Teamsters, led by communists, they went on strike, they took over the city. I remember I went home, I was in college, to Thanksgiving dinner with my grandparents and with some distant relatives. They're about the same age as my grandparents. And I said, oh, I heard there was like a Teamsters strike in 1934. And my grandparents and they're my distant cousins that were also in their 80s, they started opening up about the labor movement in the 1930s and the strikes in Akron, Ohio, among the rubber workers and the militancy going on there, and how, back in the 1930s, strikes and working class organizing and occupying your factory and sitting down, that was something people in, quote unquote, red states and small towns did all the time. It really wasn't until World War II and then the post-World War II economic expansion, we got this idea that only these pointy-headed New York City intellectuals do that kind of thing, right? That was actually, it was considered to be kind of a common thing, for working class folks. If they weren't getting the wages that they wanted, they would occupy their factories. They would sit down. You hear about and they
bring it back.
The idea that class struggle is this foreign concept, or it's something, that's kind of, that's something that's very new. And that the new left of the 1960s, in a lot of ways, it did a lot of damage. And it made sense at the time, because the U.S. economy was booming. Average Americans were saying, love it or leave it. We've never had it so good. Let's not mess this up. And it was kind of your middle class folks, your privileged middle class kids who didn't want to do a very working class thing and put on a uniform and go to Vietnam. The military service is not a fun thing, especially if you've had more of a coddled upper middle class existence, and so appealing to pacifism among more middle class folks, that was the strategy the communists employed in the 1950s and 60s up into the 70s, because it was what worked. Average Americans didn't want to hear it, but things have changed, and that's not the history of American Marxism and revolution, and that's not the history of the American working class. That's just kind of a short period. And then we also know that the CIA and the intelligence agencies, they caught on to this, and they funded the hell out of this kind of fake leftism, this middle class alienation. Susan Sontag and Hannah Arendt and all this stuff, kind of reinventing socialism not to be a populist ideology for the broad masses of people against the corporations and banks, but instead making socialism the ideology of middle class intellectuals who don't want to conform to the mob. And the more you look at all of that, like, if we want to go back to what real Marxism is about when the Communist Party was strong, and if you want to go back to the Marxism that that they have in Venezuela or Cuba or Vietnam or China, that Marxism is a lot more like what used to exist, and not like this new left stuff. And the reason that things have gotten so weird politically is we've gotten to the point that there has just been such a break between what communists internationally believe, right? Communists internationally have updated their beliefs. They believe in having a market sector. They believe in micro entrepreneurship programs. They believe in religion. In Nicaragua, the slogan that's painted everywhere is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity, right? So the global communist movement has grown up and adjusted, right? And on the other hand, leftism in the West has completely detached from international communism and turned into this vehicle for, keeping the Western world in line and trying to impose degrowth to stabilize capitalism. That we're in this weird situation where, what am I? Am I left or right? Well, I'm an anti-imperialist. That's what I am. I'm against the big banks and corporations and their corporate state that is trying to set up a low-wage police state in this country right now. And if libertarians are against it and Russia and China are against it, I'm with them. So there you go. That's where I stand.